lot of our happiness and well-being in life comes from the quality of our connections with other people, both weak ties, strangers and acquaintances, as well as deep ties, family and close friends, spouses, and so on. And yet, if you look out at the world, there are lots of opportunities for connecting with others that people don't seem to take, that would presumably improve both their own and another person's well-being, and yet they don't do it. And I want to understand why they don't do that.
That was Nick Epley from the University of Chicago, whose groundbreaking work on social relationships' impact on well-being is the topic of our conversation today.
Nick's research in this area is world-renowned. But Kurt, going back to that opening statement, I think the most surprising thing is this. While we know how important social interactions are to the quality of our life, we often don't connect with others when we have the opportunity to do so.
That is so true. And it is the core of Nick's research, as well as our conversation today on this episode of Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores stories, science, and secrets from the world's brightest thought leaders for the curious at heart. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. In our podcast, we talk about behavioral science insights that can improve your well-being and your relationships. And today's episode really epitomizes well-being and relationships.
That is very true. Nick Epley is the John Templeton Keller Professor of Behavioral Science and Director of the Center for Decision Research at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. He studies social cognition, how thinking people think about other thinking people. Say that a couple times fast, right?
That's a
How
mouthful.
thinking people think about other thinking people. And he studies that to understand why smart people so routinely misunderstand each other.
It is a fascinating conversation that looks at why we are reluctant to share, the research that he's conducted to explore this phenomena, how our mindsets matter, and how we can get to a deeper and more meaningful conversation.
And one deeper and more meaningful conversation that Tim and I would like to have is with you, our listeners. We want to know what is important to you, understand what questions you would like us to explore, see what you want to dig deeper into on the conversations that we're having. In other words, we want to connect.
And the best way to do that today is to connect with us on social media. You can follow our Behavioral Grooves Twitter account, which is at Behavioral Groove. That is Behavioral Grooves without the E or the S at the end. Okay. And start a conversation with us. Comment on one of our posts. Tell us what you feel. What do you like? What don't you like? Just connect.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you and start that conversation. And again, Twitter's great, as Tim mentioned, or reach out via Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We have Behavioral Groove accounts on all of those. Most of those are spelled right. So, there you go. Whichever is easiest for you, just reach out. We want to connect.
Absolutely. And so with that, we invite you to sit down around a table. Put this episode on a speaker and invite a friend or two or 6 or 10. Maybe they're just acquaintances, and listen to this as you share a cool drink of social connectedness and enjoy our conversation with Nick Epley. Nick Epley, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you having me here.
We are excited to have you. This is going to be fun. And as always, we start with a speed round. All right. So, Nick, would you rather have dinner with your favorite musician or favorite athlete?
Musician.
Anyone come to mind?
Yeah, I have long been a fan of Metallica since I was a kid, and I would talk with the lead singer of Metallica, James Hetfield.
James, oh man, that would be an interesting conversation.
He's a smart guy.
He is a really smart guy.
Been through a lot, unbelievable longevity.
Yeah.
Totally fascinating character, I think.
He spits just as well from the stage today as he did 30 years ago. I think it's amazing.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, second question. Would you prefer coffee or tea?
Coffee.
That one didn't have quite as much.
No doubt on that. No, I drink way too much coffee.
No.
Okay. All right. Who would win a football game between the Ole's and the Carlton Knights?
Oh, the Ole's for sure. Yeah.
Particularly when you were there, right? Wasn't there?
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's not talk about our record when I was there. But could have been better, but yeah, now not a contest.
Yeah. Okay. So, last speed round question. When you first meet someone, are you more likely to engage in some small talk or try to have a deep and meaningful conversation?
Deep and meaningful, for sure.
Excellent.
I've seen the data.
You've seen the data, exactly, which is, of course, why we're talking to you.
which seems contrary to what most people think. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So we've been working for about a decade or so now, trying to understand what seems to me like a really basic social paradox. And that is that a lot of our happiness and well-being in life comes from the quality of our connections with other people, both weak ties, strangers and acquaintances, as well as deep ties, family and close friends, spouses, and so on. And yet, if you look out at the world, there are lots of opportunities for connecting with others that people don't seem to take, that would presumably improve both their own and another person's well-being, and yet they don't do it. And I want to understand why they don't do that. And one of the things that we've really gotten our teeth into, which I think is a really general phenomena, we see it time and time and time again. This is a big hammer, and I see nails just all over the place, is that people underestimate how positively these social engagements are going to go. So conversation is a good example of this. You and I, Kurt, get together to talk for, first time. I would be happier, not crushingly so, but meaningfully so, if we had a deeper, meaningful conversation, if I actually really connected with you, if I learned some interesting things, than if we just engaged in idle chit-chat. And yet, most of us are a little reluctant when we start a conversation with a stranger to go deeper, to ask something meaningful, to ask about somebody's kids or their favorite thing to do or an important value or a particular trauma they've had in life, or these things that are meaningful that actually connect us to the mind of another person. People are often reluctant to ask about these things. And what we find in our work is that they seem to be overly reluctant to ask about them.
So what is some of the reason why people are reluctant? I mean, you talk about some of the different factors that go into why we kind of anticipate the types of interactions we get, but what are some of the reasons why we might be reluctant to go deeper in that first time?
Yeah, so let me start a very broad level and then I'll zoom into conversation. I think the general phenomena that cuts across a lot of different social interactions that we've studied, from having conversations with strangers to engaging in deeper conversations with strangers or acquaintances, to expressing gratitude or giving people compliments or asking for help when you need it. I think the general phenomena going on across all of these situations is that we fail to appreciate just how social other people are. We tend to think about other people as individual agents who have their own interests and concerns and do their own things, when in fact, people are quite social. They care about others. They want to connect with others. When you reach out to someone, their behavior is not just a function of who they are. It's a function of the fact that you reach out to them. They tend to reach back. We tend to think about other people like marbles out in the world, just these sort of independent agents with no connection to others, when in fact people are more like magnets. When they come into close proximity, the presence of one has some force that pulls the other often towards it. Not always. Obviously, we have some cases of repellent forces, but often they pull each other together. And thinking about other people as if they're marbles when in fact they're magnets, I think produces a whole host of suboptimal outcomes. Conversation is one of them. So what would it mean if I fail to appreciate just how social you are? Well, it would mean that I don't recognize how much you care about what I have to say in this conversation, right? So it would be really awkward if, Kurt, I ask you about, tell me what you're most grateful for in life. I'd love to hear about it. Tell me about the most meaningful trip you've ever taken. Who's the person in your life that's most important to you? Why are they important to you? If you assumed that I didn't care about what you had to say, and I assume that you didn't care about talking about those meaningful things with me or hearing what I had to say on those important issues as well, then it would be a really awkward conversation. I would be sharing all this meaningful stuff with you, and you wouldn't give two farts about what I had to say. And that would be unpleasant. But that's not how these interactions go. When I tell you, who I'm most grateful for in my life, which is my wife without question, when I share this information with you, you're not indifferent to that. That kind of sharing causes you to share back, right? Social behavior is reciprocal.
Yeah.
When I trust you with meaningful information, you trust me back and share meaningful information. Well, and then that's how friendships work, right? But failing to appreciate that kind of magnetic feature of interaction, that you get this kind of reciprocity, reaching out to another person means they tend to reach back to you in a positive way, means that we underestimate how positive these interactions are going to go, and therefore I think are overly reluctant to have them. So we'll stick with idle chit-chat, which we kind of all dislike at some level, when we could do better.
But yet we're still tripping over we're stubbing our toes constantly on this. This absolutely fascinates me. And I remember being a young business person in my early 20s, having a job where I got on airplanes and traveled. And very frequently I would have some business work to do, but somebody sitting next to me might engage me in a conversation. And it was always interesting. But I go back to the office and everybody in the office would be downplaying, oh, God, I get on the plane and just want to work. Just stop talking to me. So I kind of adopted this. Well, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm missing like the bold point of stop talking to people on airplanes. But I still like it. I still liked it.
I would argue that your colleagues are missing something. And
right.
And so the world, there are lots of ways to learn about the world. As scientists, we run experiments, we collect data from people in different conditions, and we learn the outcomes from people in different circumstances. So I can see, Tim, how much you would enjoy that conversation on a plane if you talked to the person next to you versus if you didn't, right? So that's what we can do in experiments. Daily life doesn't allow us that. Daily life often gives us selected outcomes. So, Tim, you chose to talk to this person on the plane and you learned something, but your colleagues maybe didn't talk to that person and they didn't have a chance to learn what that situation would have been like if they had done something else. So the world is what my former, our ex-University of Chicago faculty member at Booth, Robin Hogarth, refers to as a wicked environment. It's a wicked learning environment where the feedback we get is asymmetric. It doesn't have high fidelity like it does in experiments where we can learn from different outcomes. We only learn from the one we chose and not from the ones we avoided. And beliefs that encourage social avoidance. I think it would be unpleasant to talk to you, Tim, so I don't. Kurt, I don't think you want to have a deep conversation with me, so I stick to the shallow end of the conversation pool.
Yeah. And in that case, you would have been right, by the way, of course, with Kurt. I'm just going to say that.
We only learn from the things we do, not from the things we don't do. And so beliefs that are avoidance-oriented, that keep us from doing things, are also the ones that are likely to be the most miscalibrated because we don't learn from experiences we don't have.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, by the way, two of the in your under-sociability article, you talk about three things. You talked about the asymmetric learning and this differential construal of sociality, but you also talked about uncertain responsiveness and this concern. How did you come to these three? How did you boil all of this down with, as you said, a decade worth of data, Nick? This isn't like you just started researching this last night.
Right.
This is a passion. How did you boil these down to these three things?
So there are different ways that behavioral scientists do their work, different approaches we take. And if you take one, you tend to be condescending of others, which is a sort of unfortunate feature of the human condition. But as you get older, you recognize there's value in lots of different approaches. And so one way to do research is to start with a set of basic principles, basic psychological mechanisms. We're not very sensitive, and for instance, to to the noise that's in our judgments. We're not aware of error in our judgment. Okay. And that then leads to a bunch of different effects. You can use that basic principle to predict a bunch of different outcomes out in the world. And sometimes we do that. Other researchers do this as a matter of course in the kind of work they do. The other approach is to do more backward induction, which is to look out in the world out there and notice something that just makes you go, why does that thing happen? And this whole body of research that I'm talking about here is of that latter category for me. I so vividly remember one day on my train ride into Chicago having this overwhelming aha sort of moment. I was writing my first book titled Mindwise, where I was describing this amazing feature we have as human beings to think about the minds of others. I think it's something that really makes us unique on this planet. Much of our brains are dedicated to social cognition, and this capacity to connect with the minds of others is critical for our happiness and our health and well-being. And yet, on my train ride every morning into the University of Chicago for the better part of this was probably 7 or so years at that time I was doing this, I saw the same thing day after day after day. Highly sociable people with brains uniquely equipped to connect with the minds of others who weren't doing it ever. Like ever. You'd sit on the train, people would line up along the windows as if they were hugging, some sort of protective space. God forbid you'd sit next to another person. They had to, and then people would get on the train and they would creep in next to you, always last to me. Like I was always the guy who had the one seat next to him. Somebody would, at the end, they would be stuck sitting next to me. They would sit next to me. And then 45 minutes, we would go on the train ride, sitting cheek to jowl with someone who was social like us, made happier and healthier by connecting, one of our neighbors, not a random psychopath. And what would we do for 45 minutes? Nothing. Totally ignore each other. Like, what the hell is going on? Why do people do that? So that was and it's not like, it's not like I hadn't done this for years. I had, but one of the things you do as a researcher, I think, is that you get your antenna tuned to these kinds of observations, and they strike you as, why are we doing this? And so I had this insight one morning on the train. Why are we doing this? That's what started all of this. I actually had a conversation on that very morning with a woman I remember very well. She's wearing a red hat, older African-American woman carrying this big bag. And I thought, well, this seems dumb. What if we tried something else? And so then I tried something else. I had a lovely conversation with her for half an hour. And so that's what started these wheels turning. I study social cognition for a living. I study mistakes we make in these mental state inferences. So it's not like this was a new topic for me, but trying to explain why do we do this was like grabbing the loose thread on a sweater. Once I tugged it, all of this stuff started to unravel out of it. And then, Tim, back to your initial question, you try to explain it. This is what we do as psychologists. Well, why would we be reluctant to engage with a stranger when, in fact, it turns out pretty well? What could explain that? So at that point, you're consulting the literature. And I didn't come up with anything new here in terms of why people are reluctant to do this. What I did was I connected our knowledge. I worked backwards from the other approach to doing research. Yeah. I took this phenomena. I tried to think about why this might be not just random, but systematic. And based on what I knew of the literature, was able to identify what I thought were a few plausible mechanisms. And I started testing those with my collaborators, and we found evidence for some of them. And that's how it worked. And I'm sure there are other mechanisms at work here, Tim, other things beyond these three that we've identified. I don't know what those are. We'll find out.
Yeah. So 2 questions here, totally unrelated to each other. So let's go with the first. Given what you just said, so you got this epiphany, you're on the train, you're looking at all this, and then So what has been some of the research that you have done to kind of highlight this, to kind of get at some of these understandings of different pieces? Is there one or two research elements that you could explain with our listeners to kind of highlight what some of that research is that you've been doing to do this? Second part of the question then comes after this, going back to what you talked about moving from the like that kind of just small talk into deeper talk. And we talked about the reciprocity of this. And I'll come back to this because these are two very disparate questions, and I apologize. This idea that, all right, so in that case, do you start by asking people those deeper questions, or do you start by sharing about yourself in those deeper questions? Because again, if it's a reciprocal type of relationship, I would assume that you would start by sharing about yourself, but that kind of seems different than anyway, we'll start with the first one. Tell us about some good research, and then we'll come back to this other whole different line as we go on.
Yeah. So the research that started this whole program about what we now refer to as under-sociability, it just started on the train I was on. And we simply turned that into a legitimate experiment. When you notice something yourself, you do want to understand, is this just me? Am I weird? Right? Am I unusual? That's why we run the experiments, to find out whether effects are general and robust or whether they're unique to a particular person or group. And so one of the first experiments we did just went to the train that I ride on. We went to a station just north of us in Homewood, Illinois. We went down into the lower level before people go up on the trains. And in the morning commute, we recruited people for a commuter survey, a commuter study. If they were interested in participating in that experiment, we then randomly assigned them. And this is important. They agreed to participate before we randomly assigned them to conditions. So we're not telling them what they're going to do and then allowing them to choose, right? You're either in the drug treatment condition or you're in the placebo condition. Decide which one do you want to do this. They signed up for the experiment, and then they learned what they were going to do. And we asked them to do one of three things. We asked them to either do whatever they normally do on the train that morning on the way in, that's one condition. That's our control condition. We asked them in the second, another condition, to just enjoy your solitude on the way in this morning. Just keep to yourself. Just focus on your day ahead. That's our solitude condition. And in the third condition, we ask them to do something radical, which is, when a person comes and sit down next to you, try to have a conversation with them. Try to make a connection with this person. We then handed them an envelope that had a survey in it. That's our old school way, an actual paper survey that they filled out and dropped back in the mail. I know it. This was a decade ago. We did this. Yeah. We didn't at the time, or we didn't know how to use it. I can't quite remember, but we actually had envelopes with stamps on them, and they pulled out the survey and filled it out at the end. They also gave them a $5 Starbucks gift card for doing that, which is the most valuable incentive you can give to anybody on the planet, as far as we understand.
Especially commuters.
Yes.
Especially commuters in the morning. Yeah. If we'd actually given them a cup of hot coffee, that probably would have been better. But anyway, that's what we did. And then at the end, we just asked them to pull out the survey and fill it out and drop it in the mail and send it back to us. The survey asked them about a bunch of things. The first four things were the things we were testing our primary hypotheses. We asked them, how productive were you on your commute this morning compared to normal, much less productive or to much more productive. Turns out we didn't find any differences across conditions on this. So to Tim's point earlier about the colleagues saying you got to work on the plane, at least on the train, people didn't seem to get much done anyway on the train. Or at least once you asked them to have a conversation, they found that to be pretty productive.
Yeah.
We don't know. And then we also asked them about just how good was the commute. We asked them about their mood. How sad are you now compared to normal? How happy are you now compared to normal? We asked them how sad they are after the commute and how happy they are, not compared to normal. But then we asked them how pleasant was your commute compared to normal. We averaged those three together, reverse scored the negative item just to get a measure of, well, how positive was your experience? And what we found was that those in the connection condition reported a more positive experience than those in the control condition or the solitude condition. And so that then raised the question of, why? It's rare that people choose to make themselves less happy than they could be, or at least people think that it's not usual for them to do this. And we thought that people, to our earlier point we were talking about, we thought that people might have mistaken expectations about how these social interactions would go, and that they were then behaving perfectly rationally, that is, aligned with their expectations, but that their expectations about their commute might just be wrong. That is, we, for a variety of reasons, expected that people might think that they would enjoy their commute less than they actually would if they engaged in conversation than if they kept to themselves or did whatever they normally did. So to test whether people's expectations might be calibrated or miscalibrated, we ran another experiment, recruiting people from the same station, same time of day, but this time asking them to tell us how they thought they would feel if they were in each of these conditions. And these participants reported telling us, or reported thinking, that they would actually be the least happy, have the least positive commute in the connection condition than in the control condition or in the solitude condition. Gary Becker, who is one of our famous Nobel laureates in economics at University of Chicago, in his Nobel address noted that the rational choice model, that is the rational agent model, which is dominant in economics, assumes people are rational agents, assumes that people behave in the world in a way that maximizes their well-being as they conceive it. And that conception part is appropriate. Rational agents behave in line with their expectations. It doesn't mean that their expectations are aligned with reality. And so what we found was that people's expectations here were miscalibrated. And again, that was the first kind of tug on the loose thread on a sweater that everything else started to stem from. We found those miscalibrated expectations were quite common about interaction. They stemmed, at least in this case, again, from thinking that others aren't that social. What we found was that people thought they were more interested in talking to others than others were in talking to them. And if you didn't think other people didn't want to, if you thought other people didn't really want to talk to you, well, it'd be impolite and rude to try to engage them in conversation. But it turns out when you say hello to somebody, I love your hat, I have one just like it, which was what I said to the woman who sat down next to me that morning on the train. Well, they're going to do just what you did, Kurt. They're going to laugh. And that's going to then start an interaction that wouldn't have had otherwise without it. So that's an example of a kind of experiment we do. We've replicated that more recently, and in trains coming in and out of London. There we also find that what people are reluctant about there is not having a conversation. It's not that they think that if they have a conversation, it'll be unpleasant. They actually think it will be pleasant if they have a conversation. What they think is that starting one is going to be hard because they think other people don't want to talk to them. And so there, if we ask people to imagine trying to have a conversation on your commute that morning, people thought that wouldn't be very pleasant compared to the other things you might do. But they thought that if they actually found somebody they wanted to talk with, that is actually having a conversation, they thought would be more pleasant than keeping to themselves. So that's an example of the kind of research we do here. We've expanded this. We've done this now in lots of different domains. We've looked at once people are talking, what happens when you engage in relatively more versus less intimate conversation? That's the deep talk question you'd asked about earlier. We've looked at what happens when people reach out and express gratitude to somebody they feel grateful to, or express a compliment to somebody, or do a random act of kindness for somebody else, or ask somebody for help when they're in need. And just over and over and over again, reach out and express to support to somebody, engage in a constructive conversation. I mean, I feel like our papers are sort of broken records, but the effects are so robust that people are just not social enough for their own well-being. And we find this time and time again.
Going to the second question then, as you're thinking about that, as you talk about that deeper meaning, and maybe this isn't part of this, but do you start that deeper conversation by sharing about yourself, or is it by asking the question of somebody else? Did any kind of insights as to, so if I'm going to do this, how is the best way of being able to do it?
So that's a great That is a great question. And I want to answer it in two ways. So first, I'll say we don't really know. So we haven't tried to optimize this. And I'm sure it matters a little bit. And this is something we get questions about all the time. Okay, all right, Smarty Pants. So I'm going to do this. How do I do it?
Yeah.
How do I start a conversation, right? But I actually think that's the wrong question to ask. I don't think that's the right way to think about this. I don't think that people have difficulty knowing how to do this. They have some, and that's not to say it's not important. It is important. I think the bigger issue is that people don't try, and that it's not. I can give you a list of tips on how to start a conversation. Open with a compliment. I think actually starting by showing interest in another person. I can give you some tips. I think that's sort of marginal. I think those are sort of small things. I think the bigger thing is people don't choose to put themselves in these situations and then use the skills that they already have to make these things work. I think a more productive approach to a lot of these things in social life is just to change the way you approach other people in your daily life. If you were just more open to engaging, if you just yourself took more of an interest in other people, recognizing it'd be good for you and them as well, you would do a lot of the things just automatically that you already know how to do to make things better. So for instance, this morning we had snow here in Chicago. I have a little tractor that's got a plow on it. My kids love to ride on my lap. My youngest is 6. She's little. She loves to ride on my lap. All my kids have. I have 5. They've all loved to do this. And when we drive along on the tractor, we make a point of watching folks who come by us and we wave. We wave to them. And that act of waving makes that just so much more fun. Other people engage with us. They smile to us. They think it's fun. They're waving. Lindsay, my daughter, is waving. And so just that little thing, if you take an interest, you pay attention to other people, you start just automatically doing things that make it easier to connect with them. In conversation, you sit down next to somebody, you take an interest in them. What do you do? Well, good morning. How are you doing today? Hey, I love your hat. Geez, that's a big bag. Are you moving out of the house this morning? Right? You would do a lot of the things that are appropriate for the context that you are in, and then a lot of these other things would flow more naturally, I think. But to answer your question about, do you start first sharing something with yourself or wait for somebody else to share? I think you don't quite do either. What you do is you take an interest in another person and you ask questions that make it clear that you care about them in some way. And that will then naturally start to kind of thaw whatever ice was between you and make it clear to the other person that you just are genuinely interested in what they have to say and that you're willing to share. And that, escalates the reciprocity and you end up having a nice conversation with somebody.
You talked about compliments, Nick, and one of the papers that I love that you wrote was a study with some MBA students about having them to basically be complimentary to someone, and that it's it seems like it led you down a path to make a claim that you can't compliment someone too much. Is that an overstatement? I might be overstating.
I think that's probably an overstatement. I think the right way to describe this work. So we've got a few projects or few results that are in this ballpark. One involves expressing gratitude to somebody. Those tend to be people you know well. Those are really deep and meaningful things that compliment somebody else on something really deep and meaningful that they've done for you. That's kind of turned up to 11 on that social interaction. Compliments, though, can be just anything that comes to mind. Hey, I like your hat, or I like that poster on your wall behind you, Tim. A compliment that comes to mind that can be seemingly rather small or maybe not of so much consequence. I think what our research tells us is not that you should be social all the time, not that you should always be talking to strangers, always be engaging in deep conversations, always be giving people compliments, on and on and on. What we've identified, I think, is an important point of friction in social life. Cases where would maybe want to reach out and engage with somebody, but you're a little nervous about doing that. These approach avoidance conflicts are all over in daily life. And it's those places where you're conflicted. Should I say hello to this person? Should I give this person this compliment that came to mind? Everybody has somebody they feel grateful to who they'd like to tell them, but they haven't figured out quite how to do it yet. Those are the places where being off a little bit on the cost of reaching out and engaging, or underestimating how positively these are going to go, that are going to cause us to make unwise choices that you would regret.
So if we ask the question, should I or shouldn't I, we've already answered the question. The answer is just go ahead and do it. Go ahead and make the compliment.
Yeah, so exactly. If you are having that dialogue with yourself, should I do this or not, you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's clear to you, this is a psychopath, right? Or this is a dangerous situation, or nothing positive at all is coming to my mind about this person, right? If you're purely in the avoidance category in this situation, our data don't suggest that you should ignore that, right? Like, our data don't suggest that you should get into the car of a stranger who comes by and invites you into the car, right? That's not what they suggest. What our data suggests is that when you're in this mode, when you're conflicted, you're probably getting the cost wrong. That avoidance calculus is probably off a bit. And if you were aware of that, I think you would make a different choice in these situations. So I'm not wildly social. I'm not that guy on the plane that talks your ear off to death. But, when I get a sense that, this person would be interested in talking, or I know they'd be interested if I started and I'm able to, they seem able to, I'll start it. But not all the time. So there is a happy medium.
I love your willingness to sort of admit to the epiphany on the train as kind of a me search kind of a thing. And I think I don't know. I just, on a personal level, I think it's really great that people who are doing the kind of work that you're doing are paying attention to the world in a way that says, wait, I'm affected by this. Maybe somebody else is. And I think, and we get inspired by that, because we're practitioners, right? We don't have a phalanx of grad students at our disposal, to get research done.
Mm-hmm.
So we are grateful that you take time and energy to observe the world, ask a question, and then try to solve this problem of why do we do what we do. So, there really wasn't a question there, but I do.
It's a compliment. Tim is giving you a compliment.
I appreciate that very much,
there.
Tim.
He's
Thank
applying
you.
this as we're
Thank
doing
you.
this.
I appreciate that very much. One of the things I say to my MBA students every year when I'm teaching is that everyone in their daily lives is a behavioral scientist.
Yeah.
Everybody does this.
Love that.
Right? And we all have beliefs and causal theories and about why people do what they do. I mean, I'm in these conversations all the time. I'll tell people about the research I'm doing and then just wait for them to tell me why people do this, right? Everybody's an expert in this. I don't think this happens to physicists or neuroscientists, but it happens to me all the time. And the difference between what we do as behavioral scientists and what we all do as intuitive scientists is that we subject our observations to a higher level of scrutiny, ideally, that allows us to see things that everyday experience doesn't always give us. We see all of the observations that we could across a wider range of people, measuring outcomes carefully and tracking them over time rather than just using our memory for events. So it's not a difference in kind, what we're doing here as behavioral scientists versus as intuitive scientists. It's a difference in degree, in what, how we're assessing evidence. That's the only difference. I don't think behavioral science starts well if it's not connected to the world.
Yeah. We've interviewed people that we call accidental behavioral scientists, exactly that they are doing this. They're all of these factors, they're trying to understand why people are doing what they're doing. They just don't have the language or the research background, but they're applying all of these principles in practice in a daily life kind of thing. With that, where's your research going? What are the things that are top of mind for you now moving forward over the next couple of years? What are the things that you want to explore and get a deeper insight into?
So I'm in the midst of writing another book right now, which is sort of consuming every spare thought I have beyond trying to get our papers out.
And what's the book? Can you give us a little overview of what this book is going to be about?
Yeah, the book is about under-sociality. Is about people not being quite social enough for their own well-being, why that happens, what the consequences of that is, I think, for our own experience, and also I think for society as well. So a lot of the angst and disconnection we're seeing in the world today comes from people not really engaging with each other in a deeper way, becoming really disconnected from each other in lots of ways, and that just creates ill health, not just at the individual level, but at the societal level as well. So that's where my attention really is. And beyond that, we don't, I can't see that far ahead. The great thing I think about research is that it unfolds as you're doing it. I can tell you about the papers we're writing right now. We're trying to understand how individual level beliefs about each other can produce social norms, kind of social level effects. So why is it sometimes we get situations like a train car or a plane where people almost never talk to each other versus others like a party where everybody talks to each other? Why? It's not, these things don't show up everywhere. We think they're critically contingent on people's beliefs and expectations about others, and we're trying to track that. But where the next epiphany for where this goes next, we don't know.
Where that next woman in a red hat is, we're not quite sure.
I don't know, and absolutely, I don't know. You're when you're in the midst of a project, or series of projects, you're often thinking, what's the bigger thing to do? So, we'd like to take some of this work around the world in different cultures, different contexts, make it big, I actually think that what varies a lot around the planet are not people's experiences of social engagement, but rather their expectations. And so that you can explain more open or closed cultures, not by differences in their actual sociality, but rather by differences in their beliefs. That's a very hard problem to study, but that's the next big thing I'd like to start tackling. I know other people are tackling different aspects of this kind of work. So my friend Liz Dunn, who's at the University of British Columbia, brilliant behavioral scientist, is trying to understand how to encourage people to be more social. Right? So how do we overcome these expectations to encourage more sociality? Those aren't problems I'm that well equipped to think about. Other people are better at thinking through those kinds of problems than I am. And so I don't necessarily see our work going that direction. But then beyond that,
who knows?
Who knows? We're blind runners here, where we can see kind of as far ahead as we can feel in front of us. But long-term vision, and any given experiment is likely not to work out. That is, your hypotheses are likely to be off in some way, and you're learning as you go along. You don't know what you're going to learn.
Which is the fun part about the research, right? I mean, if everything
absolutely
rolled out like the hypothesis that you have, then it would be like, all right, well, yeah, we're just making good guesses, and that's not how this works.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The key thing I am harping on my students about all the time, and it's a subtlety of language that I try to drive out of my own thinking and out of my students as much as I can, is not to talk about experiments as showing that. We designed this experiment to show that, or we would like to prove that, or would like to demonstrate something. We don't design our experiments to confirm our beliefs. Rather, I try to encourage my students and myself to always think of in terms of testing that.
Yeah.
We designed this experiment to test that hypothesis or to test whether, because the most interesting insights from research, I think, the things that really get you moving down a new path are the cases where you were not right, where your expectation led you astray. One great example of that in our work was one recently where we were trying to understand how to overcome some of these misunderstandings about the minds of others. So it's hard to know what others' beliefs and attitudes are. And one of the ways that psychologists, I think, had presumed for a long time would make us better at this was engaging in perspective taking. So, Tim, if I just put myself in your shoes, try to see things from your point of view, if I sit down next to you on the train or a plane, then I'll be better able to understand whether you want to engage with me or not, or I'll better understand your beliefs or attitudes. And we started some experiments trying to understand, well, how does perspective taking like that increase accuracy? And it just turns out it doesn't. That is, putting myself in your shoes, Tim, doesn't do squat for me. It turns out, in understanding, as far as I can tell, doesn't increase my ability to accurately understand what's on your mind. It does a lot of other things to me. Makes me feel closer to you and makes me think that you're more similar to me. But it doesn't necessarily give me access to your mind because I don't have access to your mind. I'm just guessing in my own mind. So that project started with a hypothesis tests that just turned out our expectations were just wrong. And we're wrong again and again and again and again and again and again and again. We published a paper with 25 experiments in it where we were reporting that engaging in perspective taking, putting myself in your shoes, doesn't increase the accuracy with which I predict your views, your beliefs, or your attitudes. And only one thing does, it turns out, which is the really stupid thing, the stupidly obvious thing of just asking you what's on your mind.
Wait, that's the headline.
Yeah. Yes, no, I was about to swear. No kidding.
No
yes,
shit.
no
That's
kidding.
okay.
No, this is a no shit moment.
Yeah, no kidding. But what was interesting about that paper was the obvious solution was the only one that increased accuracy, but people didn't recognize that. That is, they thought perspective taking would increase their accuracy. They thought doing that would make them better. And when they were actually doing each of these things, when they were engaging in, when we brought spouses in together to put themselves in their partner's shoes to guess what was on their mind, they thought they were doing just as well using a completely ineffective strategy as when they were actually asking their partner what they thought about these questions they were then later having to predict their responses on. So insight often comes, I think real insight comes not when we're doing experiments that show that, it's when we're doing experiments that test whether. That's what we're trying to do.
I'd like to switch things up a bit here. Forgive the lack of a clever segue, but I'm interested in talking about music for just a minute. And if you found yourself stuck on a desert island, let's say you're going to finish the book, you're going to separate yourself from the whole world, from your loving family and wonderful colleagues in Chicago, and you're going to stay on a desert island for a year. What two musical artists would you take with you?
Oh God. Well, we talked about James Hetfield earlier, so I'd need Metallica's uplift at times.
Yeah.
And then I would probably bring along this guy a piano player named David Tolk, T-O-L-K, who I really like. He's kind of a new agey, he's not a new age is the wrong term for this. He's just a pianist who I think plays beautiful, soothing, lovely music. My daughter takes her naps to David Tolk, asks Alexa to play David Tolk. And the thing about music is, of course, it moves us.
Yeah.
It creates emotion and then does different things for us when we need to get ourselves riled up. I'm going to get the wild boar on the desert island. I better, listen to a little Master of Puppets. And when I'm ready to take a nap, I better cue up David Tolk's Amazing Grace and calm down a little bit. So that's what I do. There would apparently be no middle ground for me.
It's like either
constantly
or
riled up.
Like I'm hunting boar,
totally
or
chill.
I'm writing and contemplating life.
Well, we are novelty seeking, right? So, of course we would set it up that way. You might only when you get to the desert island, it might only be just about hunting wild boars and Metallica. But do you like to listen to music while you work?
I do, yeah, I do. Not music with words, typically. It depends what I'm doing, of course. I can listen to music with words if I'm doing something that's more mechanistic, analyzing data or something that where the steps are pretty routinized. But I will often have music playing that doesn't have words, instrumental music, calming music. So David Tolk, for instance, the guy who I just mentioned, Tolk. And I've actually recently, what I was listening to before we started talking was I watched the Channel 5 production, which is playing in the United States now on PBS, of All Creatures Great and Small, which is, if you haven't watched this television program, it's just the loveliest thing. Just my wife and I watched it, and I'm obsessed with this. And they just had the loveliest instrumental music to go on with this just beautiful show that was about just a lot of these beautiful human relationships in this lovely, UK countryside setting on these old farms. Gorgeous. And so I've been playing that in the background while I've been working.
Cool. Very, very cool. Well, we want to express our gratitude to you for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves today. Thank you so very much for taking your time and sharing your insights with us. We really appreciate it, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you having me on here. This was really fun.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our discussion with Nick, have a free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our socially connected brains.
You're making it sound like there's something weird going on there.
We have it's like the social, it's what's that Marvel, the connected brain? I forget who. Anyway,
I don't know. But Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit philosopher from the early 20th century, called it the noosphere.
Ah. Notice you go to early French philosophers, and I'm talking Marvel. Shows you where we spend most of our time, right there.
It really is. It's really,
and I can't even remember the Marvel thing where you can quote like nice and direct. That's that. There you go, folks. If you want to have a deep conversation, talk to Tim. If you want to just talk about
comics,
hey, who's better, Iron Man or Captain America? Come talk to me. There you go.
All right. Well, where do we want to start this grooving session on next?
I have a question for you.
Oh.
Do you talk to people on airplanes?
I
like
do.
Strangers that are sitting next to you.
I do, but not all the time.
Okay. What? Why?
Well, and the reason that I do is because I read Nick's paper.
Okay.
So a few years ago, and I took it to heart, and so I don't do it all the time, and I absolutely didn't do it much before that. But I like it, I have to admit. But not on long flights. Like we flew to Qatar. It was 16 hours in the air. No, I was not interested in starting a conversation that might last that long. But like on hour-long flights or, 2-hour-long flights, I think that it's okay just to have a little bit of chit-chat and find out if they're getting divorced or not, or who's if their grandmother is dying, or, you get these really weird interpersonal things, and I like it. And how about you?
It's really interesting because I don't, and I have this
not at all?
I typically don't. So I there have been a few times, and those few times have been absolutely wonderful. So it's this idea I've had great conversations. And I've never had a really horrible one. I've had one, I think, where the person droned on a little bit, but, I was able to weasel my way out of it. So it wasn't like it was horrid.
Yeah.
But I just don't. I get my book, I get my headsets on, I kind of make it pretty, noticeable. Like, don't talk to me until we land and the wheels hit and we're getting the ding goes on, and I go, oh, and then you have that conversation. But man, yeah.
Because you've only got like 6 minutes between
and
touchdown and the
as horrible as that conversation can be, it's only going to last for a short time, then for sure. But given this, I'm going to, because of this research and because of talking to Nick, I think I'm going to be more like you. I'm going to make an effort to say hi, to introduce myself, and ask just some meaningful questions that might lead to a good conversation. I will tell you, I had one of the best conversations ever with this guy coming back from on a red eye from Las Vegas.
Huh.
I was young and great, and telling me about his, how he goes out to Vegas and gambles and he flies out over the weekend during football season because he bets on all the sports things and how much he bets. And it's just an interesting conversation, so you have some really interesting conversations.
Okay.
But,
So it's happened.
It has happened. Yeah.
And yet you still steered away from it until just recently?
Yeah, because, I never trust my own intuition, and I need research to back it up. So
yeah,
no, I don't know. It's as I think one of the things that he said, right? I think even though I had the good experiences with this, I still had that fear. The fear that I'm going to get stuck in a bad conversation, but two, the fear that the person sitting next to me isn't going to want to have that conversation, right? They're going to want to be left alone. And so I'm bothering them by trying to initiate something.
I don't know. I've when I started doing this, I took it from the place of you never know. And I'm just going to be friendly and see what happens. And again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I've met some really interesting people.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting people. People who were wildly financially successful, wildly successful in their sort of their relationships, like they had great families, to rely on. And people who were troubled. I wasn't joking about I'm just getting divorced or holy cow, my grandmother just died and I'm going to the funeral. It's like, shit happens, it's real life.
But this is the piece that I the big piece that I'm taking out of this. And it goes back actually, John Levy talked about the same thing, but this idea that, the well-being in life comes the quality of our connections.
Yeah.
John Levy said it in this way back in, I forget which episode he was in, but he said, the fundamental element that defines the quality of our lives is the people that we surround ourselves with and the conversations that we have with them. And what I love about what Nick is saying is saying you have both those really tight and deep, meaningful relationships like we have with our families and our close friends, but there's also those weaker connections that make a difference in our lives. And particularly, this is the part that I think, John Levy's talking about is the conversations that we have with them. And if we have better conversations with people and more of those better conversations, we have a much better life. And that's what I'm running with. Yeah.
It is. That's fantastic. I love that quote from John. Just kind of love John in general because he's such a sharp guy. But it is so interesting that Nick has picked up on this idea that even though we know it's better, we still don't do it. That we know that we rely on other people, that we rely on relationships, and yet we still don't do it.
Yeah.
We talk to people at parties, but oftentimes because we have to. Because it's the social norm. So gotta go to this party. I'm gonna meet a whole bunch of new people. Okay, put on my party face.
And what happens at those parties when you start talking to those people?
You come away with, okay, that guy, I'll never talk to him again. But oh my gosh, this woman is doing some incredibly cool stuff. And I would have never guessed that she's a psychologist and she's doing research in this and that. It's like, wow, great conversation,
And you leave typically being more pumped up than not, right?
Yeah.
When you have those conversations,
Yeah.
right? If you go to a party and you don't talk to anybody, that's a pretty bad party, right?
Yes.
And why don't we think the same thing on a train ride or a plane ride? Why don't we think about this as I'm sitting around all these people who have interesting lives and are doing interesting things, and we could be sharing and talking to each other, and I should be disappointed when I land and I haven't talked to the people around me.
I've taken this into Katie and I have tickets to the Guthrie, a local theater in town. And when we sit down, and if the people sitting adjacent to us are already there, just say hi.
Yeah.
What brought you here? Are you a big fan of Shakespeare? Or are you just a season ticket holder? Or, just start a little conversation. And even though there might only be 5 minutes, it's just nice to kind of smile at somebody. And it just feels good.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think there's a lot of those opportunities that we have in line, waiting at Starbucks, doing whatever it would be. You can be having those different conversations. We skiing. You ride up the chairlift
Right.
with people, and
Or when you're waiting in line
or
for the
waiting in
chairlift.
line. There's all of those things. At the basketball game, we were at the just like you at the Guthrie. There's different people that sit around me by the Timberwolves game all the time. I know I have something in common with them. They are obviously basketball fans,
Right.
So
Right.
right there, you can start up a conversation, and those are much better times when you have that conversation going than when you don't. Anyway,
You're part of the same tribe.
Yeah.
It's not like you're part of the I'm flying from Minneapolis to Chicago tribe.
Yeah.
You're part of we like sports and we like basketball tribe. It's much more meaningful.
the Minneapolis to Chicago tribe. I like that tribe.
Pretty weak tribe.
So what I also like though was in the conversation that we had with Nick is he talking about so why does this happen, and some of the research they did around that. And I love the way that he talked about that misalignment between reality and expectations. We expect people to, that this won't be easy, that it's hard, that they're not going to want to talk to him.
Well, you're like a walking lab. This has been you, right?
It is. This is exactly me. Others don't want to talk, all of those things. I think that is great. So here's the thing. If you're listening to Tim and me talk right now, right, I encourage you to try this out.
Hell yes.
Just go out and make an attempt, whether it be at your local theater, in the shopping, mall, and you're in line waiting. Just say hi to somebody and try to start up a conversation, because that's what I loved. Nick's thing. If you're having a dialogue with yourself, should I do this or not? You should do it.
That's it. That's exact. That's the best question right there. And don't be creepy.
Well, I don't know if you can help but being creepy, Tim, but that's a whole separate aside.
But to follow that, it's good to start by just sharing first.
Yeah.
You don't have to put somebody on the spot. Oh man, I didn't think it was going to take so long to get through this line.
Yeah.
I'm just buying, 6 pairs of jeans, 9, t-shirts and, 18 pairs of socks, and they're getting heavy in my arms, or I don't know.
You've given an insight into your buying habits here. you just go and buy all your clothes for the entire 5-year period and one time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it comes down to, though, I think the big piece that kind of he brought up is that it comes down to mindset, right?
Yeah.
Being more open to these interactions, thinking of this as a party as opposed to a plane ride where you put your head into your book and put your headphones on, right? You open it up.
What did he say? We're more like magnets than marbles.
Oh, I love that quote.
Love that line.
Yeah.
We're more like magnets. So just let the magnets, again, there's 2 poles, right? We're not always going to match up, and we're not picking partners for life. It's just for the next minute and a half or 6 minutes. Is there a conversation that we might have that could be enriching or not?
Or not. And in either way, it's not going to be, as you said, you're not picking your partner for the rest of your life. You're not going to be, have a horrible experience that you're going to be, miserable for days on end. It's a good conversation or not. And more likely than not, it will be a good conversation. Probably. And that, I think, is so go out there, take the initiative, be first to share, have a different mindset about it. And, you're going to be happier for it.
Agreed.
All right. So I think that's a good place to wrap up.
I think so.
All right. As always, thank you for listening. And please reach out to us on social media. We want to have those deeper and more meaningful conversations with you. Yes, you, the person who has your headphones on right now and you're listening to my voice. I'm talking to you.
As I'm sitting across the table from you and you're looking at me and you keep saying this, it feels just a little bit impersonal. Just saying that. It is true, though. We do want to hear from you because
we're talking to you.
Well, we want to do it even more and more than we're doing it now, right? And as we do more of it, it's going to improve our well-being. It's going to improve our subjective experience. It's going to improve our psychological richness.
And it's going to improve your well-being, listener.
Not bad.
There you go.
Right. That's right. Everybody benefits.
Yeah. We're just such giving people, Tim. That's all we're doing. We're just giving.
Okay. Maybe we are. I don't know.
All right. If you don't reach out to us, which I can understand because we probably just freaked you out with this whole
Possibly.
2 minutes here. You're going, those guys are freaks. No way am I connecting with them. Then at least start a conversation with someone when you're on your next plane flight or in line at Starbucks. It will make your life better. Science proves it.
Bing. Yes. We truly appreciate you spending time with us, and we hope that you've learned something. Maybe there's something that Nick said that you can take with you, like we're more like magnets than marbles, and that you can go out and use that today, tomorrow, this week, and hopefully you can go out and find your groove.